We've been doing a lot of different things with COVID, trying to educate, prepare, prevent, do all these different things. And as the vaccines came about and the time that we're living in right now, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of uncertainty. Depending on who you talk to or who you trust in, you're going to hear different things about the COVID vaccine and whatnot. There's a lot of hearsay out there, a lot of myths. But anyway, actually, Jay Beach had the idea to bring somebody in here that's well versed on the subject matter to maybe try and dispel some of the myths. So he reached out to Firelands. Firelands was gracious enough to be happy to come do this for us. So we've got two very important people from Firelands right behind us here. Their CEO, Mr. Jeremy Slay, and the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Scott Campbell. So we thought, what better people to get an education session from than the people that are dealing with this every day and have been for some time now. So please welcome them. We appreciate you coming and doing this for us today, and hope everybody enjoys this. Jay, if you have anything to add?
No, I don't. I just really appreciate you guys coming out and doing this. It's something that I wanted to do because I have been hearing a lot of different things addressing specific questions, and a lot of it's contradictory, and we'll hear some of that in the questions that we received throughout the week here. So I'm going to be starting off asking those questions for them, letting them address those. If we have any other questions in between, it's going to be pretty open for them.
So that being said, we'll turn it over.
Is there a camera on these? Do you want us to?
Yeah,
like,
I'll turn that on.
Do you prefer us to sit? Do you want us to stand?
Whatever you guys would prefer is fine.
Like to sit or stand?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't. You sit, and then I'll sit next to you. So my name is Jeremy again. I've been here in this area. I know there's folks watching and watch this later, but I've been in the area about 3 years. So I've been involved in healthcare as a CEO of this institution locally here, Firelands. More of my time has been spent during COVID than outside of COVID, and so. I think we have a lot to thank for our industry workers that have been plugging away the uncertainty that you all have. I eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff, right? If I want an expert opinion on pretty much anything related to COVID, I know that Dr. Campbell has spent more hours studying this than anybody that I could get close to. He's listening to talks on his way into work. He's listening to virologists on his way home from work. And he's such an asset to that. I realize everybody doesn't have access to a Dr. Campbell. When we first got asked about this, we were kind of said, "Hey, could you come in and chat about this?" And we're like, "Well, is this a good idea or is this a bad idea?" And we don't know, because half of you are probably looking at me like, "Oh my goodness, I've heard this type of person speak. He's going to tell me to get vaccinated and why it's okay." And the other half are like, "I already got vaccinated, so can you tell the person sitting next to me that they need to get vaccinated?" But the one thing is, we're not going to change your mind. I heard this quote a few weeks back. We're not going to change your minds. Our job is to give you information to the best of our ability. We don't have an ulterior motive. I'm not going to get to look at the microchip that's in the vaccine that's going to get implanted into your arms, right? I don't have access to that. But really, we do just want to give you information. And again, you're going to see. I'm going to take a real back seat to Dr. Campbell, who is really, truly the expert on this. And if something that we present causes you to think about something a little differently or give you a little more comfort, if there's fear out there, understandably so, we've kind of done our job. And if this goes well, we may offer it to some other employers. So we haven't done this with anybody else other than our own employees. So, kind of thank you for giving us the time and the platform. The other thing that we've really tried to do in healthcare, and I can't say this is true of everybody in society or politics, we are not about vilifying or talking down to anybody who has a differing view on this. Everyone is on their own journey. Like one of the gentlemen said before, we all trust certain individuals or certain places to get our information from. And what more can you expect from someone, right? We've learned to trust those who we've trusted before. And so you're at a place now where you've made a decision on one side or the other. and it doesn't make you a bad human being or a good human being. It's not. We're trying really hard to not make this an us-them. We're all in this together. We've all got our journey together. And again, just thank you for giving us the time here today. And with that, I'll let you say a few words before the question starts. Dr.
All right. Hi, guys. Thanks for coming. So just a little bit about me. I've been here at Firelands Hospital. I started in 1992. I'm an emergency medicine physician, been the director of the emergency room throughout my career here. And pretty much been here in Sandusky at Firelands for my entire career. So I came out here from Toledo after I trained, and I never left. So ER is my trade, which is obviously a little bit of everything, and that's what I've done for my career. And then a few years back now, I got looked at for this, when Jeremy arrived, for this Chief Medical Officer job, which is kind of an oversight of the hospital physicians and trying to help the administration understand what's going on the clinical side, and the clinical people to understand what's going on the administration side. I'm kind of that bridge between the two. So when I took the job, it was in January of 20 for the Chief Medical Officer job, and when I signed my contract, it said nothing about COVID. And so when COVID showed up, I just kind of, by the short straw, became the COVID guy for the hospital. And so I take anything I do fairly seriously. And I jumped in with both feet because we had a hospital to run, and we had nurses to run, and we had patients coming. And as you know, at the beginning in Italy, the sky was falling, and where do we head next, and what are we going to do? So I have been enthralled in this for the last couple of years. I am very objective. If I start talking too much science, just stop me. But I mean, I've probably read more about this stuff than anybody should. I realize there's a lot of differing opinions. I try really hard. I have 250 physicians I have to advise on this topic. And so I have doctors coming to me all the time. What do I do with my patients? How do I treat? What do I use these medications for? Throughout the hospital, throughout the entire system. That's my job. And so I take it very seriously, and I'm also very objective. So I really don't conjecture a lot. I really don't listen to opinions a lot. I tend to get into the literature. The scientific articles you hear about, I don't just read the title. I actually look at them. Are they good studies? How many people were involved, etc. So I really do dissect all that stuff, so I can say just because the title says something, it might be a worthless study. So, I'll try not to get into all that with you, but I'm going to do my best to just try to answer your questions as honestly as I can. And we're not all going to think the same here. I'm going to tell you how I think with the best facts behind it that I can. And then you as Jeremy says, you make up your own decision at that point. And we will say that at least you've had the facts put in front of you to make your decision wisely. So, okay. So with that, we'll go. And I think Jay has some questions we're going to try to answer that you guys submitted. And then after that, I think we can just take some questions that are on your mind. And then, that old no stupid question thing. I mean, good Lord. How many questions could there possibly be on this subject that we don't know, and we've heard somebody say, or we read somewhere, could it be true? Because it is tough to keep up with all this, because I'll tell you, like drinking from a fire hose, as my friend here says, since this thing started, I've been trying to digest everything coming in because there is so much information out there. And as you know, even from the medical experts, there's one opinion one day and another the next day. So I'll give you my best of what I've learned. So, all right, Jay.
Okay, well, I wanted to start off here with just kind of defining, figuring out what are the differences between vaccinations and other types of medications. Leading into that, I have three to go together here because, again, a little bit of contradiction in the questions. But I have mRNA vaccines are newly distributed technology, but my understanding is that they have been in development for decades. Can you speak to that? Also, what is the differences between mRNA and other types of vaccines? And then with that is, compared to other vaccines, the COVID-19 vaccine was developed very quickly. How is this able to be completed safely? How sure are we that there won't be any serious side effects 10 years from now?
Okay, well, that'll be the first hour. No, so seriously, what's the difference between a medication and a vaccine? So a vaccine is basically introducing something to you into your body that your body sees as foreign, but sees it on a lesser scale, so now it can recognize it. Once your body can recognize it, it can turn on its defense systems, which are fairly complex, so the next time it recognizes it, it can defeat it. We do that all the time. So vaccines do that, but also our world does that. So if we're exposed to something in our world, our body mounts an immune response to that, so the next time you see it, then your body has seen it already and can beat it down. Medicines, what they do is they go in and trigger pathways. So let's say a medicine that's going to lower your blood pressure. So you give that medicine and your blood pressure will lower because there's certain enzymes that allow your blood vessels to dilate. Because of those enzymes, if we take a medication that works on those enzymes to amplify them, then that medicine will dilate your blood vessels and your blood pressure will go down. So medicines are really, they turn on hormones, they turn on pathways, they make our bodies do things, and then they're almost like keys. That's why a little pill works as good as a big pill. They're just a trigger. Where this is literally bringing something foreign into your body that your body sees as foreign, stimulates your immune system to kind of look at it and say, if I see that again, I'm gonna hit it harder. So maybe the first time you have the flu, for example, you might get really sick, where the next time you get it, your body's a little more prepared for it. So that's kind of the difference between that. So as far as the different technologies, and I could get into all the nuances of all of them, but the bottom line, first of all, the mRNA technology. So there's a guy out there that was working on mRNA technology in the 70s. Okay, so this is not a new technology, but the problem is they couldn't figure out how to work it, how to make it work. It was so inflammatory to the body that everybody would get sick with it, and then your body would attack that RNA to where it could never make a vaccine. But the thought was always there, could we use this to treat illness? Could we treat cancer? So if we go back to 2002 when SARS came out, if you remember, SARS was over in Asia, and that was the severe acute respiratory syndrome. We all heard about it. Back then, they were making an RNA vaccine against SARS, and actually with the same technology that we're using 20 years later, and that was successful. But the problem with SARS got kind of went away. So it didn't become a pandemic. It killed some people, but they isolated, they figured out how to stop it, and that disease never kept going. So for a vaccine to continue to prosper, first of all, you have to have the disease. If the disease is around, you can keep testing the vaccine. You can find out if it works. You can find out if it doesn't work. If the vaccine goes away, that doesn't happen. If the disease goes away, it doesn't happen. If the disease goes away, there's no money. So the reality of it is you have to have money to produce vaccines, to produce new technology, to make it better. There has to be funding behind that. So when SARS came around, these scientists all had these great ideas, but there was no money to perpetuate the funding. Same thing happened in 2012 with MERS. This RNA technology was used on the Zika virus, was used on rabies, was used in animals. So none of this was as new as people tend to think. But what happened was when this pandemic came, and at the very beginning, they said, hey, here's this SARS-CoV-2, and they knew the DNA. They looked at it and they're like, we've got a jump start. We've been looking at this for 20 years. We've got a jump start into something like this. So they started ramping things up. Well, then as this thing progressed and started to look like, hey, this might be a pandemic. This is actually spreading between countries. Now you got people's attention. Now you got people with money's attention, be it the federal governments of these countries. And now they're going to start putting money into pushing behind some of this technology so people could really start to utilize it. And so I think that's my best answer for saying this wasn't new just when this virus showed up in January. This has been going on a while, but finally somebody could put money behind it. And the other thing is normally when a drug comes out or a vaccine, there's phase trials. There's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So you start over here and you kind of figure out the dose with a few people, see if anybody gets killed from what you're trying, the very beginning, right? And then you go to more people and you kind of figure out if it works with them. And then you go to more people. The phase 3 trials are usually tens of thousands of people trying the vaccine. Once all that's done, the companies get that data, they submit it to the federal government, and they ask for permission to make this vaccine. Then that goes through the FDA, goes through the channels, goes through the committees, and then it goes back to them, and they're like, okay, we got approval. Now we got to figure out how to make it in mass product. We have to start producing it, ramping up. This takes years for that to happen. So what they did this time was they actually had the vaccine, they had what they were going to present. The phase 1 trial was going on. They overlapped it with phase 2, but because it was a pandemic and going through the country, all of a sudden money started coming in to where the federal government said, somebody's talking on here, I don't know if you can mute that.
I think somebody, if everyone can mute yourselves on the other end of the presentation.
There, Joel, thanks.
Okay, so they had money and said, okay, let's start producing this stuff now. Let's build the factories now. Let's start making it. And at the end, if they find out it didn't work, then we'll throw it all away. So nobody ever had the money. They actually kind of did that with polio, but nobody ever had the money to do something like that, where the federal government's like, yep, turn up your factory, produce this stuff, and at the end it doesn't work out, we'll get rid of it. But if it does work out, we are years ahead of ourselves because we've done this process simultaneously with the other process. Where in the past, no company would ever risk starting production on something if they didn't know it was going to work or anybody was going to buy it. So that's really the bottom line on, I think, my answer for why it's not as fast as you may have thought. Lastly, just the different vaccines themselves. Without getting too deep on that, the RNA vaccines, what they are is they're taking so you get this virus, all right? We got SARS-CoV-2, the Chinese put out, here's the virus, here's the genetics behind it. We figured out a way, as soon as we know what that is, we can replicate that DNA. We can look at that virus pattern in the lab. They make that lab and they make instructions on that. So the other thing, just to back up, we talk about the spike protein. Spike protein is the Achilles heel of this virus. They figured that out 20 years ago, that the spike protein was the way you kill a coronavirus. So that extrapolates to now, so we can take that information that we get and you can make in the lab a blueprint of the spike protein. All right, so that's what an RNA vaccine does. It takes the RNA, which is basically a blueprint message of the genetic sequence. That blueprint is then put into a particle, which they never figured out for years. How can we put it in the human body without the human body destroying it? So they finally figured out that they use this lipid, this fatty particle, that they can put it in the body and it can actually get into your cell and your cell can make the protein itself, but it won't be destroyed by your body yet because it's protected. So that's kind of where the science went. So the blueprint is put in your body for the spike protein. Never does the virus enter your body. Never is the virus made by your body, just a protein from the virus. So then your body turns on and makes proteins. It makes the spike protein from the blueprint. That blueprint lasts about 2 days and goes away. Now your body does the rest. It's stimulated to make this protein. You make the protein, which is the spike protein. Your body sees that spike protein and says, foreign invader. I don't know what that is, but it's not good. It attacks it. The B cells, the memory cells, the T cells, all that stuff that goes into our fighting force, if you will, attacks this thing and remembers what it looks like. In other words, that enemy had a red coat, tall hats. I know what they look like. So if they come back over the hill, I'm going to be ready. So now your system is primed. It's ready. It's now seen the spike protein, and it's ready for it to come again. So along comes the coronavirus, shows up with a spike protein on it. Your body says, whoa, wait a minute. I've seen this before. And it starts to attack the virus. And the idea is before that virus can get in your cells, replicate, and destroy you, which is what a virus's job does. Viruses don't think. They got one job in mind, and that is to reproduce. So that's what an RNA vaccine is. If you look at a couple of the other ones real quickly, the adenovirus, they take a virus that's inactivated. So in other words, a common cold virus that won't cause you a cold, they've inactivated the virus, and there's all kinds of ways they do that. They stick in it DNA, which is the same idea. They're giving a blueprint to your body. It goes in there, and your body makes the spike protein. So that's what that's what the Johnson & Johnson does. It actually uses a virus to bring it into your body, but it brings in DNA. The other one uses fat to bring in RNA. But all they are really is blueprints to your machinery to make the spike protein so your body can see it as a foreign body. Now, in the past, what we've done is we've weakened viruses. So you take like the influenza virus, the flu, and you take that virus and you make it so it can't hurt you. They turn it so it doesn't work in certain temperatures. It won't work in a human body temperature. So they make it grow only in cold. So it gets in your body, it won't grow. So they take that virus, but it is the foreign body that your body sees. And that's how our flu vaccines are made. So it's all the same idea, priming your immune system so your immune system can attack this thing before, because if it hasn't seen it before, it can come in and win the battle and reproduce in all your organs and bodies and overtake your body. And so that's how vaccines work, basically.
All right.
Now with that, you mentioned that the blueprints are only in there for a couple of days.
Yeah, literally they say about 24 to 48 hours that blueprint dissolves. So that theory that this somehow incorporates into my DNA is completely false. This goes into the cell where the machinery is to take the blueprint and make proteins. It does not go into the nucleus of the cell where our DNA is at. So none of these enter the nucleus of the DNA or incorporated into our DNA. So that's just inherently false. That went out there, but scientifically it doesn't even make sense if you know how the whole process works. So it doesn't stay in your DNA, it doesn't change your DNA.
Would that give confidence that there's not going to be any long-term side effects then?
Correct, in that there will not be long-term side effects from this thing going in your body. In other words, you're not going to get the RNA and 10 years later that RNA is in there causing you some kind of problem. Where the side effects come is because this is turning on a process in your body, right? You're making proteins, your body's activating hormones, so your body's doing something. Can there be side effects from a vaccine? There absolutely can. We know that from vaccines in the past. Almost all, and I'm going to say almost like 99.9% of side effects from vaccines are known within the first 2 months. So if you look back, of course we've had vaccines forever, right? So if we look back at all the vaccines, chickenpox to polio to measles, we kind of knew with it, and I say we like I'm the big medical community, but you know what I'm saying. So we, being the medical community, kind of knew that the side effects that were going to occurred within the first couple of months, because that's what your body does when it turns on its things. It's not like 10 years later, all of a sudden your body's going to do something different. All this thing was doing was triggering your body to make a motion, to do something, to create a pathway. And there have been vaccines that turned on certain neurologic conditions. There are vaccines out there that have caused some problems in the past. They're not harmless necessarily, but once you give them to a lot of people and you start looking as time goes by, you get pretty confident that they're safe. And that's what we've done with a lot of vaccines. And there's a lot of vaccines that are prior to this that show us how to do this. This isn't like the first time we've ever had a vaccine.
So big, heavy scientific one there to begin with. The next one I think is probably a little bit of a harder question here for you. But what do you say to people of color or other marginalized groups whose hesitancy is rooted in the historical mistreatment by the government and medical institutions, or at least the perceived mistreatment?
I mean, start with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And quote, like, am I willing to gamble that they care this time?
Yeah, so that's a fair question. I don't know if any of you saw earlier, it must have been really early in this year or late 2019, there were two separate City of Sandusky Facebook interviews. And one of them focused on, I think they both focused on some of the insecurity in that. And a lot of this dates back to the Tuskegee experiment. So I won't go into all that, but if you haven't read up on that, there's some valid mistrust based on the way the institutions of government and health have acted in the past. Well, the second forum that we had, there were 4 African American physicians who were on the panel, and I think the first thing that those physicians did is acknowledged that this did happen, and there is some mistrust, and that the best way to kind of overcome that is to find a physician that you trust, that you can chat with about your health and why this might be a good thing. Now, what was acknowledged through that process is that many individuals in our community, even going to the doctor's office where nobody looks like them, nobody acts like them, is not a comforting spot to go for your health care. But the reality is that as medical providers, the physicians in our community, almost all of which Scott knows really well, I'm getting to know well, do care about our community. And what Scott also pointed out, that this is not an experiment that was put on by health entities. This is actually has blossomed into a pandemic that has now killed over 700,000 individuals in the U.S. And I would venture to guess that regardless of your ethnic background or your socioeconomic makeup, by this point, you've probably known about someone not that far removed from you who has fallen either extremely ill or passed away. And that goes beyond the color of your skin or your history. And those real interactions, I think, are what has probably caused most people to take this so seriously. So the difference with some of the sins of the past, the Tuskegee experiments, and some of the health regulations and policies that have really discriminated against individuals are there. They were real. And I do see this as a different way to interact, and one that I have seen more effort in reaching some of our more vulnerable populations than any other social health action in my time. At Firelands, we held I talked about the 2 forums that we held specifically geared toward education. We also held 2 vaccination clinics at Reverend Johnson's New Jerusalem Church. Reverend Johnson is on our board of directors and was supportive of that. So we know that is a hill to climb and very real concerns, and we're just continuing to try and educate and give comfort and acknowledge so that some of that trust can be rebuilt.
Are these conversations that you are having?
Oh my goodness, yes. Oh my goodness. So we've in the last year we've actually we're not immune to this even as a healthcare organization. If you are a black man or woman right now and you'd say, I'd like to go and have someone treat me who looks like me, where's your African American physicians who are doing primary care? I would say, well, we had one female and she retired last year. I don't have that answer, and so. Jim and Matt are on our board. We have started a diversity and inclusion committee within our hospital. We've started a community health committee at the board level to try and bring more diversity, because ultimately that's the answer. Is when you're getting health care, you want to get health care from someone who looks like you, who can relate to you as much as possible, who you feel comfortable with. I guess I shouldn't take the looks. I have a 5'2" female provider who's my primary care source, but. You want to feel comfortable with that. So we have a lot of work to do in the health system, and we are acting upon it. And I'll tell you, this is one of the most common conversations about demographics and vaccine hesitancy. And yeah, we're talking about it all the time. Appreciate the question.
Could natural immunity be better than the vaccine immunity? Does the vaccine kill off, compromise, weaken the immune system?
Say what natural immunity is.
Okay, so no, the vaccine doesn't kill off or weaken the immune system in any way. It doesn't really work that way. Could natural immunity be better than the vaccine? My answer is maybe. Okay, so I know some people are like, jump on the bandwagon. Natural immunity doesn't do anything, right? I disagree.
What's natural immunity? In case everybody.
What's that? Oh, what's natural immunity? So if you get the disease, are you immune, right? So if you get the disease without a vaccine, is that enough? So a lot of people have that question because it's probably 30% of people have had the disease now. So if you look at that, but the problem is there's some varying evidence on that. So some people at the beginning that had natural immunity, what they found out was their antibodies weren't as strong as those that had the vaccine. And so the initial studies were kind of done in the lab. And so they came out and said, natural immunity doesn't count. What they found out, and there's been a lot of studies recently, and you'll look at different countries do this differently, that show natural immunity is pretty darn good. But does it last forever? No, it wanes, it goes away. And so the question is, how much time before it goes away? So if you had COVID-19 in March of 20, are you still protected today? The odds are you may be. You may not be. You may be more if you're young and healthy. You may be less if you're older. There's no way for us to quantify that and say, how immune are you? How protected are you? So what they have shown, though, if you've had the disease and then you get the vaccine, you're probably more protected than anybody because that combination is excellent if you've actually had the disease and get the vaccine. So I won't discount natural immunity, but I will tell you that overall our federal government is. They're basically saying natural immunity doesn't count. You're either vaccinated or you're not vaccinated. They don't really look at that where other countries do. So Israel, the UK, some people do. But what they're saying over there is, okay, we're okay with natural immunity if you were sick within the last 3 months. After those 3 months, you need to get a vaccine if you want a vaccine pass to go to our bars and restaurants. That's Israel. Go to another country and they'll say, okay, that's good for 6 months. If you had the disease, we'll give you 6 months. before you need to get a vaccine. And that's probably all reasonable. I think realistically we're seeing it's about 6 or 8 months before you see some significant lessening of your immunity with natural infection. Well, we've actually seen it with the vaccine as well, right? Hence the boosters. But some diseases in the past are better than the vaccine. Measles, for example. You get measles, you're done. Never again in your life will you get measles. You're immune for life from the natural infection. That's good with other diseases. Chickenpox, very good with natural immunity. We've had other diseases where you're not so good. Let's take an example of RSV in babies. RSV in babies, that can really take a kid down, right? Make them not be able to breathe right. They get it this year, and then all of a sudden the next year they got it again. Was their natural immunity good? Probably for 3 months or so. They didn't get RSV again that winter. But boy, you're bringing your kid in again for RSV. So they had the natural infection, but is it good enough to keep them from dying from RSV the next year? It might not be. So it depends on the disease whether natural immunity stays with you or not. And what they're finding out about coronavirus is natural immunity is pretty good. In some people it's longer than others, but maybe a little less robust. If you can vaccinate, you can be much more sure of the longevity and how robust that response is. So.
Okay, so you hit on that a little bit. So if you do get the vaccine, you can still get COVID. Then why should I get the vaccine? Obviously, it lessens the chance of it, but does it protect this in the same rate versus the Delta variant?
It doesn't. Okay, it doesn't. In that, so a lot of the stuff that's come out so far has been pre-Delta. So you look at all these statistics and they're 6 feet apart and all this stuff. A lot of that's pre-Delta. Delta has changed the game a little bit because this dang thing is infectious. And we've seen it at the hospital to where we thought we were doing really well. And all of a sudden this thing came back up and up goes our admissions, up goes our deaths in the ICU. Things changed. And so this virus is definitely more infectious. So the bottom line is if you get your vaccine, you're way less likely to get the disease than if you are not vaccinated. I think we pretty much know that. Your odds go down. Can you still get the disease if you're vaccinated? We all know it's on the news every day, right? Yes, you can get the disease. So if somebody had a bad immune system to begin with, let's say they were a cancer patient, and they got the vaccine, and then Delta variant shows up, that vaccine may not have given them a good immune response because they're a chemotherapy patient. Where somebody's 20 and healthy, that vaccine did work. Now, they could both get the disease, but the first person's going to be the one that's going to get sick from the disease. So you get COVID-19, even though you've been vaccinated, likely with this Delta variant, it can happen. You can still get it, but you're going to have a cold for a couple of days, or you might not feel good for a couple of days, and that vaccine is going to keep you from going on. The viral load of how much you can transmit, how much can I give it to you sitting over there if I've got the disease and I'm unvaccinated, that stays high, and it stays high for a while. So for the next week, I'm going to be able to give you that disease sitting over there. If I'm vaccinated, when I first get that coronavirus disease, I may have a high enough viral load to give you that disease over there, but probably only for a few hours. Maybe for a day, but then the next day my levels drop, my virus load drops, so I probably can't give you that disease, but maybe for the first day I'm around you, as opposed to somebody that's unvaccinated can probably give it to you for the next week or two. So it's not perfect. This wasn't designed to say you will never get this disease again. It's to keep you out. I know you've heard this over and over in the news. It's to keep you out of the hospital. It's to keep you from dying, and it's to keep you from spreading it. And this thing that came out when they first changed the mask guidelines and they said over in Connecticut, all these people were vaccinated, got the disease, and vaccinated people can spread the disease just as much as unvaccinated people. And I think that was kind of BS because that's not really true. What they showed was on that first day when they measured levels, everybody who was unvaccinated had pretty high levels. But they went on to show that those levels dropped really fast, but nobody talked about that. Does that answer your question? I think bottom line is that, it makes everything harder to transmit, and it's still really rare to get an infection if you've been vaccinated. So you're talking 0.2% of the population. They did some really big studies at the Cleveland Clinic and showed that, you're talking maybe 4% of the population, if you're in that unvaccinated crowd, got a subsequent infection, where you're talking 0.2% of the unvaccinated, even though you're hearing on the news, because every time somebody that's vaccinated gets the infection, it's a headline, right? It doesn't need to be a headline. It's most of the time not very sick. Do people that were vaccinated get COVID-19 and get sick and die? They do. It's extremely rare. Those people that has happened to in our hospital, I know from day one, they are susceptible. They're kidney transplant patients, they're chemotherapy patients, they're patients that are dialysis patients with bad diabetes. We kind of know who's going to have those problems. And the people that are healthy and do really well with the immune response to the vaccine are not the people we're putting in the hospital.
And of those in the hospital, I sent out an all email user email, a week and a half ago. We had a 20 something year old, two or three 30 something year old, two mid 40 year olds. So all of those my age or younger. And in those younger demographics, not one of those individuals was vaccinated. Do we have some vaccinated folks in the hospital? For sure. At any time, 20 to 30% could be vaccinated. But like Dr. Campbell said, there's usually something underlying about those individuals where the sickest and the youngest and sickest who are in the hospital are unvaccinated. That's just the truth. Okay.
Yeah, I had a few questions that you kind of already answered with that, but there's a couple quotes in here. If you have any thoughts on, like, my wife has already had COVID, I didn't get it or have any symptoms, so I'm not concerned. I worry less about myself getting sick than I do about taking an experimental vaccine. However, I do care about protecting more vulnerable people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, am I my brother's keeper? Is it my job to protect everybody else? I understand, no, not necessarily. And if there's some items where, your risk could be lower. I think what Dr. Campbell has said, that risk is so low that for us, if we're giving advice on that, there's such low risk, maybe a little illness for a day or two after your second vaccine, often more than the first. That the brother's keeper argument has a little more weight. If just because you didn't get it when your spouse has it doesn't mean you won't get it. And one of the saddest stories that we hear are some of these folks who are coming in really sick and really young and saying, is it too late to get the vaccine? And it is. I mean, once you're in the hospital, it's too late to get that vaccine. So, I guess.
Or once you get the disease, for that matter, right?
Yeah.
Once it hits you, there's no turning back. Could you read that question again?
The one about the spouse, or which one?
Yeah, the spouse had it, and I don't think I need to get it.
My wife has already had COVID.
Yeah.
I did not get it or have any symptoms, so I'm not concerned.
Okay. Yeah. And so, I think that, I think one of the things is that there's a lot of people that got this disease and do perfectly fine with it, right? So they get the disease, they got a cold, they ache, they go back to work. What's the difference? Just like the flu season, it's no different to me. But what we've seen is kind of a Russian roulette. Why does it pick off somebody? A lot of times we know because they have other illnesses and stuff, but every once in a while we're just kind of baffled at the hospital why this unvaccinated 33-year-old goes on to not do well, and we're not sure. And so the other thing I'll just mention is that this long COVID or this long hauler syndrome is not made up. We see it as physicians because we see people that had the disease a year and a half ago that aren't better yet. And so if you didn't get the disease from your wife the first time, good for you. Maybe you should be a little closer with your wife. No, just kidding. But maybe not good for you. But if you didn't get it, it may just be your immune system. Maybe her viral load wasn't high enough by the time she was sitting next to you that you breathed it in. You got lucky. That's okay. Or maybe your immune system saw it and defeated it and you were asymptomatic and maybe you did have the disease and you didn't know it. I mean, all of that is possible. But if you get that disease, and let's just say you have a cough and a cold and you're sick for a week and you can't taste and smell and you're tired as heck and you don't feel like going to work. Now take those symptoms I just talked about you had for 3 days and think about what it would be like to feel like that for a year. And that's not a scare tactic. Everybody doesn't get that. But by gosh, do you want to be one of them? It's pretty crappy to have something that never goes away when you could have prevented that. You could have prevented that long hauler syndrome. So I think that comes into play as well.
And then there's a couple comments about just different fears of things that you get with the vaccine. Like I've heard about people dying because of the vaccine. And with a low mortality rate after contracting the virus, I'm not sure it would be worth getting vaccinated. Or is the risk of heart and neurological issues from the vaccine greater than the risk of COVID?
Okay. So do people die from the vaccine? So I like the statistics are, let's just take, take 1 million people at the beginning of the week and we give them all the vaccine. By the end of the week, we'll pause.
Station identification.
Yeah, but there's never been proven that there's any harm from the vaccine. We're talking millions and millions of people have gotten this vaccine. It's not like we've seen a bunch of deaths from the vaccine itself. No one's ever proven that that's happened. But do people die after they get the vaccine? The answer is yes. And what I mean by that is if you give 1 million people the vaccine at the beginning of the week, you know, I'm going to make this number up, so don't take it literally, but let's say 140 people by the end of the week will die of a heart attack. 120 people by the end of the week will die of a stroke, because that was the natural progression. Every week somebody dies of a heart attack. Every week somebody dies of a stroke. That's just what happens in our world. So it's really hard to look at those statistics and say, so if you're on the anti-vax side, people are going to say, oh, look, they got the vaccine and 2 days later they died of a heart attack. Well, they've never shown that those two are related, but you can extrapolate and say, yeah, the vaccine killed all those heart people that week, but if the vaccine hadn't been there, those heart people would have died anyway, because that's how it works. So in general, the safety of this, I guess, you know, you want to trust somebody. And I'd say somebody like myself, and it kind of goes back to the racial thing as well, about who do you trust and people experimenting on me. You know, somebody like myself who's been helping people for 30 years, that's what I do. I mean, I've always been about helping you, and I don't care what flavor you are, how tall you are, where you're from. When I'm in the emergency room, everybody's the same. We take care of everybody. So if I thought after my entire career in medicine that somebody was out to hurt everybody, that they're bringing this out to destroy all your lives, and you know, we're going to destroy the population, I'd be singing from the rooftops along with a whole lot of other people that this is not right. And you know, the vast majority of people are not singing from the rooftops. If you look at the overwhelming majority of the scientific community and doctors in general, they believe in this because we believe in vaccines. I watched Haemophilus influenza vaccine when I was young. Kids were dying right and left from Haemophilus. Now your kids get the Haemophilus, the H flu vaccine, and those kids no longer die. So I'm a believer. I've been made a believer of vaccines for many years. So I think that's kind of, I segued off of that point there, but that was kind of what I wanted to say.
I'm going to hit that a little bit harder than also with, I am skeptical about the vaccine because of all the incentives, gift cards, paid time off, lotteries to get the vaccine. And it makes it seem as if there's an agenda, almost like a bribe.
So there is an agenda. We want you to get vaccinated. I mean, I get it. But I'll tell you also, for that very reason, we held back from doing those incentives because we heard that feedback. So we thought about, I mean, we do have some wellness incentives through the hospital. I know the health department is actually having a $100 certificate of some kind. At the later stages, we held back because we heard that feedback. And so, again, to Dr. Campbell's earlier point, if you're susceptible, that seems like a bribe, and if they got to pay me to do it, there's no way I'm going to do it. If you're really passionate about getting an entire country or community vaccinated, it's like, if this works for 5 people, great. I'll give out money. And, you know, for better or for worse, there is a lot of money flowing towards this. Dr. Campbell talked about the money going to the pharmacy, the vaccine producers to get it out, but there's also money from the federal government and the state government to try and incentivize communities to get vaccinated. So I understand the point. We've changed some of our tactics as we've heard that feedback, but it really depends on what lens you're looking at that through. That will determine whether you think it's a really good idea or a really bad idea.
Do you think there's a disconnect then between like the political aspect of getting the vaccine and the medical aspect?
Oh my goodness, how long you got on that one? I mean, I don't know. The more, so now it's probably not the appropriate place, but the longer I see adults interact in politics, it just seems like we're a divided country, and anything that's going to divide us along party lines is benefits. I guess, I don't know, the politicians maybe. So I mean, it saddens me that this has become a little bit more of a political, a little more of a political issue. I was at a family reunion this summer, sitting next to my cousin, who is probably about as far left as anybody you'd meet, and then my uncle, who's probably about as far right as you'd meet. I'm the son of a Southern Baptist pastor that's in healthcare, and so I see right down the middle. I see both of their points and can understand why with passion they are both speaking to those points. And I was just kind of able to say, you know what, here's where I am, right down the middle. And I understand what you're saying, but this really, it saddens me that this has been used as a tool to divide, when really it is about the data, and really opinions should be removed from this, and we should follow the science on it. So I guess that's a long answer to that short question.
I mean, it's been politicized to no end. I think that people like me and my colleagues are really try to be apolitical on anything when it comes to medicine. You know, I'll give you an example. There's a pneumovax shot. So that's for the pneumococcal pneumonia, which has killed people for years. And they came out and they invented this pneumovax shot, which they determined was going to keep people dying from pneumonia, which I have seen for my whole career. And so they rolled it out, and they've been giving it for years. People go to their doctor's office, and your doctor says, "Hey, Scott, you're due for your pneumovax vaccine." And my answer is, okay. You know, that's how that's medicine. I trusted somebody made the right decision, okay? That doctor made the right decision for me. That doctor got their information from somebody that's trying to look out for my welfare and help me out. I didn't ask them who voted for this medicine, when was it made, how fast was it made, what's in it. I mean, I know I'm not disrespecting people that think that way, but I'm just saying we didn't do that with other vaccines. We didn't do that with other, you know, I got my pneumovax series without even thinking twice about it, because you got to trust somebody. If I'm trusting somebody to do what you guys do, I trust you to do what you do. I don't do this. I don't know anything about it. And so at some point you got to put your trust in somebody that knows something better than you, whether it's a financial advisor, a physician, or whatever. We can't know it all. We can't learn it all, and we have to trust somebody. So if you come down and you've got cancer, and I tell you, yep, I see a cancer tumor, and here's the medicine I think will get rid of that cancer tumor, who are you going to trust? You got to trust somebody. You got to say, okay, doc, I got to trust that you know that cancer medicine is good for me. I know, and then we try to give you the pros and cons of using it. But at some point, I think that's almost how this goes. We don't need politics in that medicine any more than I need politics in this medicine. So I think we're all looking out, you know, I think doctors are really looking out for your well-being.
How does the reinfection rate between those with and without a vaccine compare?
Reinfection?
The reinfection rate, so I think I kind of mentioned that earlier, kind of a 0.2%. They throw some different numbers, depends on which study you read. I think there was a 0.8% in the big Cleveland Clinic 50,000 person study, and they literally took people that had the infection, people that had the vaccine, people that didn't have the vaccine. So, you know, if you're talking about,
how likely are you to get the disease a second time if you've had the vaccine versus haven't had the vaccine? I don't know. If that's
so yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's about 0.2% versus about 3.8 to 4%. I think is what it goes up to, that you're going to have it again if you haven't had that. So that's about the rate in those studies. It varies greatly, but if you start looking at 4% versus 0.2, well, 0.2 times 10 gets you to 2 times 4 times 2. That's 20%, 30% difference. So you're getting some bigger numbers than you think. So I think the bottom line is we know the vaccine works. I don't think we can dispute that. We know the unvaccinated get the sickest and have the worst outcomes. I think we know that. I think that all of the hospitals out there have at least proven that much. Do you get reinfected with it? As I said, you can. It's way less likely and a pretty small number compared to those who never got the vaccine at all, because this thing is so contagious. It's going to find you if you didn't get a vaccine. And I mean that in that it's kind of looking for dry human wood to burn. And there's a lot left. There's 70 million people in the United States that haven't had the vaccine. So it's going to look for them because they're the easiest to get in and attack. Is it going to find some people that have had the vaccine? It is. But some of those do have more of a defense shield up. So I think the reality of it is that's what it does. It's kind of proven that to us now.
And I'm curious about the booster shot. When will it be available and for whom?
Okay. So just to understand, there's vaccines in the past in history have often been series of vaccines. So hepatitis B, for example, you get the vaccine, and then you get another vaccine a month later, and then you get another vaccine a year later. That 3-part series primes the immune system properly to give you protection. So what we're doing with this one, basically, they said, okay, let's get the vaccine out. Normally, you would never give it again in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. You would really wait. But because we were in the middle of a pandemic, let's get out as fast as we can and still get some protection. So that's where they came up with the 3-week, 4-week between doses. So once you get those 2 doses, the next dose is basically the 3rd dose. So what they're saying is for the immunosuppressed people, the people that have bad immune systems, that's a 3-dose vaccine series. That's your 3rd dose. For everyone else, the 3rd dose is a booster. It's taking those first 2 a later point in time and helping your immune system react to it. That's not new. A lot of vaccines have operated on that same premise, that you kind of give them in space and time, and that's how your immune system reacts. So what boosters are available? Right now, the Pfizer vaccine, the booster is available to anybody basically that is over 65. If you have a lot of medical problems, you're over 50. It's not available to the under 50 crowd that are healthy because the science says your immune system's good. You probably don't need a booster yet. You may be able to wait. My son's 25 years old and he got his vaccine and he could probably wait 3 years before he needs a booster. So everybody's a little different on the need, whether they're going to need to boost up. But I think it's well proven, kidney transplant patients and cancer patients, that first 2-dose regimen wasn't enough for them. They really needed a 3rd dose to give them a better immune response. And they've studied the heck out of that, right? They've looked at the immune response, they've measured it, and they said 3rd dose made a big difference. For other people, the older folks in the 80s and 75, 80-year-olds, they're also finding that they didn't quite get a good enough response out of 2, but they're showing that the 3rd really made the immune system come to life. Again, that is not new. That's been done for vaccines. Polio vaccine was done over 4 years. Started with a couple, another one a year, and then 4 years later. So a lot of vaccines have been that way. That is not new. Everybody's looking at it like, oh, I need a booster because the damn vaccine didn't work to begin with. And, that's not true. The vaccines work, but our immune system, they're waning because we don't always know what a vaccine's going to do until we actually do it. And this is the first time we've ever dealt with this. So I think we're actually seeing what happens and we're measuring it and we're responding to it, so to say.
And then the last one that I have before we open it up, alternate prevention and treatment of COVID-19. Does breathing in hydrogen peroxide on a nebulizer help with prevention and treatment? Are there any side effects that I should be concerned with?
Okay, so there's a lot of alternative treatments. There's holistic medicine treatments out there. I'm a science guy, so I'm going to believe in things that are studied, that are in randomized controlled trials. I don't believe it just because somebody said, hey, these 3,000 people got it right. You got to see a blinded study. You got to look at things objectively. We know hydrogen peroxide kills coronavirus, and it's used to clean surfaces and stuff. Hydrogen peroxide's been used, this is not new. So other viruses in the past, people have used hydrogen peroxide for and thought that they could inhale. And what happens is, what is coronavirus? It is a respiratory disease. So if you are positive for coronavirus, the way you're gonna die or have a really bad outcome is your lungs. It's gonna affect your lungs, it's gonna cause fluid retention, it's gonna scar them, you're not gonna be able to breathe. Okay, hydrogen peroxide is known to cause scarring and damage to the lungs. So if you breathe in hydrogen peroxide through a nebulizer, you will injure the lungs. You may not at very low doses, but that's not going to kill the virus. So there's no proven fact to hydrogen peroxide doing anything for this virus. And I would highly recommend ever inhaling hydrogen peroxide because that can actually damage your lungs. And if you're already with a disease that's going to affect your lungs, that could be a real double negative for you.
Do you have any other questions, comments?
Okay, where do you guys suggest we should look for new, updated information? I think there's a lot of skepticism with the media, the news. In your guys' opinion, where should we look for factual information if we don't have something like this in front of us today?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because I get all this information off of Facebook, by the way, just so you know where I've been getting my sources.
TikTok.
TikTok, yeah. Facebook's for old people.
Right.
I was told by my son.
That's right.
It's a good point, and I think that to try to at least find, and it's tough because you don't know if somebody's a sheep in wolf's clothing out there, right? So they've got MD after their name, they got these letters after their name, they've got a podcast, they must know what they're talking about. So I don't know if I have an easy answer for that, other than maybe asking your physician to help you look at, but there are good podcasts, there are virologists out there, there are people on the, go to reputable sites. So the Journal of American Medical Association, for example, that's been around forever. The British Medical Journal has been around forever. They all have COVID podcasts. And so if you wanted to listen in on some of the stuff they're talking about, it's not all, they have kind of stuff for the public a little more and then stuff for physicians a little more. My chair's rolling downward slowly. I think that it is hard to know that. I think it's not social media, but if you really delve in to try to look at, if this guy's a teaching professor at the University of San Francisco and he's, still there academically teaching medical students, he's probably not completely crazy. I can't guarantee that. But if you kind of really just look at your sources, they're easy to access. You can put in the topic that you want, but really look for people that are affiliated with universities, not retired for 30 years. People that are really involved in the academics of the real world that are going on now. And I think that's a good way to start.
And we've even put lessons over time. Initially, we put a ton out on our website, and we really pulled back from that as well, just because people were saying, well, do I trust Fisher Titus's or Firelands or the CDC or public health? So we've really tried to defer and direct towards the CDC, to health authorities, because early on, we were given a lot of mixed messages. One group's wearing a mask, one group's not wearing a mask, one group's telling you this, we're rolling back policies. So we've really just tried to stay consistent. And there's even been some topics where I think what Dr. Campbell spoke about earlier, the U.S. has chosen to say, you're either vaccinated or you're unvaccinated. And part of that is because it's so hard to keep up with. How are you going to really determine who had it within 3 months or 6 months? And so some of the stuff that is being done by, the authority figures or public health or the CDC is because that's the way they can track it. And you could argue a nuance of is that the absolute best way, or is it like 95% of the way there, but at least they can track it. So we've even tried to defer to some of those standard sites versus trying to do too much of our own data lately.
Yeah, none of them are perfect. The CDC is a good source. Do I agree with everything they put out there? I don't. I think sometimes they are looking at how they affect the public and stuff, but I don't feel like they're blatantly lying to you. I think that sometimes they're trying to get everybody to cooperate because they want to do the right thing. When I look back at the CDC and who's in it, if you look at the career scientists that are there, those people, and the FDA or wherever you look at a government, most of those people are people that have been 40 years of virology and vaccinology, for example. When I look down at who's real, you're just seeing the talking heads on TV, but the people that actually are behind the scenes really have devoted their lives to this kind of stuff. So again, we have to trust somebody. So that's really, I look at all of that, but you're always welcome to sign into This Week in Virology, one of my favorites. No, don't.
And I go to Scott. I go to Scott.
Yes.
My 3-year-old granddaughter has COVID now.
Yep.
And I spent time with her unknowingly,
Yep.
why isn't it, and I'm vaccinated, but I didn't have to quarantine? I guess I don't understand if there's a chance that I could pass it to somebody else.
Right. There's a fine balance between what is perfect and what is the real world willing to accept now. We're all tired of this dang thing. It's been years. And if we tell everybody you're going to lock yourself in your house, you're not going to come out. We go back to the very beginning of this. Most people aren't going to tolerate that. So I think that's another good example of what I'm talking about the CDC. They're trying to do what's realistic. And so when they say something like that, you're vaccinated, you're asymptomatic, you had an exposure. We don't need to test the asymptomatic exposures. Is there a possibility you could carry the disease and spread it to somebody else? There is, but if you're asymptomatic and vaccinated, the odds of you spreading that to somebody else are really, really low. Is it impossible? No, but we can't put everybody in a bubble that happens to be by somebody that has disease, because first of all, nobody's going to tolerate that anymore. So I think those decisions are made based on reality and what we can actually accomplish.
And secondarily, if for someone who is looking for justification not to get vaccinated, they see that, oh, well, if I get vaccinated, I still have to be quarantined. Why should I get vaccinated? There is a little public perception that I think they're trying to weigh. And I think that Dr. Campbell said, if you were to get symptomatic, it's probably a 1 day, and we'd hope that if you had an exposure and you were symptomatic, you would self-isolate for that day because you know the exposure. But your point is
and again,
fair.
if you're symptomatic, you would have to quarantine. This is just for asymptomatic people that you don't quarantine.
Right.
So, yeah.
Where does the medical community right now stand on masking? sort of inconsistent where you go place to place these days?
On masking?
Did you see us? We had our masks on when we walked in through the office, and then we got into this, and it's kind of like outdoors, so we
Yeah,
took
it's
them
big,
off.
the air's moving. I've listened to way more things on masking than I should ever in a lifetime. There's so many scientists out there proving whether the droplet travels 3 meters per second and how far it goes, and it got nauseating, to be honest with you, at the beginning. So, is the mask the holy grail? It is not. Does the mask prevent the virus from moving around between people? It does. So, my answer is it's one more weapon or one more tool you have in the toolkit. Do I think it's it's going to prevent everything? I don't. So you take a simple cloth mask, you're maybe dropping down 10 or 15% of what's transferring out of your mouth. You take a surgical mask. It was about 50-60% with the alpha variant. Now that the Delta's here, it's down to about 30 or 40%. So if you both have them on, then of course that multiplies things, right? Now you're less likely to spit it on me, I'm less likely to spit it on you, we're less likely to breathe it together, and we're close together in the same room. If 5 people in the room have COVID and I have my mask on, good luck. It's not really going to do you any good. It's just, everybody's got it. It's in the air. So my take on masks is I think, now we're not talking about respirators, which we wear at the hospital. That's a whole different animal. If you're in an N95 respirator, I don't know, you guys probably use them somewhere here, right? You're not getting, I can go in and take care of a COVID patient and feel safe that when I'm putting the tube down their lungs to breathe, I can feel safe. So that's a different mask. But as far as plain surgical masks and cloth masks, I think one side gives them way too much credit, right? One side gives, and I think the other side gives them way too little that they're worthless. I don't think so. I think it's somewhere in the middle. But none of that is compared to a vaccine. I mean, we're talking about hand washing and social distancing and air vents and HEPA filters. None of that all pales compared to a vaccine.
Good question.
Yes.
Pregnancy,
Yes.
fertility.
So this one's been this took off from the beginning because there is a protein in the placenta that's very similar to the spike protein, and so they thought since the vaccine attacks the spike protein, certainly it would attack the placenta. And that was put out by some scientific people at the beginning of this. And boy, that didn't take long to light the fire through Twitter and everything else. And everybody said, oh, it's going to affect fertility. And so, people are having a baby. They're about as cautious as it gets, where they might have drank something before. They're not drinking it now, right? Or they quit smoking for the pregnancy. They do everything right for the pregnancy. And now you tell me to get a vaccine that nobody knows about and hasn't been tested on pregnant women. So I get it. I think that at the beginning we realized that, in the studies, pregnant women really weren't in the studies. But once those studies happened and those people got vaccines, a lot of those people went on to get pregnant just by definition. And so they started seeing that, hey, and that's how it works with every vaccine. We don't tend to test things in pregnant women because it doesn't look good, right? So after a while, you start to see, the pregnant women are doing really fine with this. Well, then what happened next was, which nobody knew at the beginning, the pregnant people started doing really bad with COVID. So now you started seeing premature births. Now you started seeing mom die during the pregnancy on the people that were positive for COVID. So you go in with a COVID.
And unvaccinated.
Unvaccinated, right? Yeah, so if you're, we just know that if you have an unvaccinated person with COVID and you're pregnant, you have a chance to lose your baby, you have a chance for a low birth weight baby, you have a chance for mom not to make it. And so then at that point, millions and millions and millions of vaccines have been given. Now we have a huge number of pregnant women we can evaluate, and they start looking at that. And that's how they've done with every vaccine. Once the numbers get up, now you have a test study, right? And they say, okay, look what's going on with pregnancy. And they found that the vaccines were not affecting pregnancy. The people were doing well. The people that weren't doing well were the people with COVID. And so the obstetric community, the American College of Pediatrics, the maternal fetal medicine, everybody came out and says, okay, we need you to get this vaccine. We think it will prevent you from having COVID, which will cause a bad outcome for your pregnancy. There is no evidence that the vaccine is harming fertility, is harming lactating mothers or breastfeeding. And actually, just like the flu vaccine is given to pregnant women, when you breastfeed, that antibody goes to your infant or your newborn and gives them protection against the virus they're new to the world, they've never seen before. So that's pretty well proven with other vaccines. And so now, just the last 2 weeks ago, maybe a week and a half ago, the CDC came out and said they sent a medical alert that we are advising every physician that deals with pregnant women and pregnancy and fertility out there to strongly encourage your patients to get the vaccine because Delta variant started killing moms and killing babies at a rate not seen previously with all of the other variants. So I think there were 175 deaths up until now, and there were 21 in August just from the Delta variant of mothers. And so nobody had seen that before, so they saw the Delta variant was kicking up this rate exponentially in moms. So they came out with a warning that said, before we were advising this, now we're saying, you know, almost pleading, if you're pregnant, you're breastfeeding, you're going to get pregnant, please get the vaccine because this can save your life or your baby's life. And that's where it stands. And so those fears are out there. I think 30% of pregnant women are vaccinated. So I mean, 70% aren't buying this argument. I get it. I mean, that's a tough decision to make, but boy, I'll tell you, we do see these people come in with COVID that have a rough time with pregnancy, and it's out there. So it's just something else. I mean, if that answers your question on fertility.
I saw a hand up there.
What's the main difference between the alpha variant and the delta variant? Is it like the shape of the protein or how the protein grows?
It is. It actually has to do with the ribosomes on the protein. The protein's on the surface of the spike protein. So they actually changed between the alpha. They're all the same. It's all the coronavirus, right? And what happens is this variant, what a variant tries to do is get more infectious, right? It wants to replicate, because if it can replicate, it can live longer. That's really all it's trying to do. In general, viruses don't get meaner and meaner and meaner and kill you all off because it just kills the population, has nobody to replicate it. So in theory, that doesn't mean all of them have, because some of them have gotten more deadly over time. Ebola is one of them that did that. So, you know, basically, I lost the question there.
The differences in the alpha and what's the difference?
Yeah. So the difference is basically alpha came out, it was the initial, you know, with the D461G. It came out, and what happened was it got in people, and it's not the vaccine that makes it mutate. It mutates. That's what viruses do. It got in people and it mutated. And our immune system started, this is before vaccines, started to see the virus and started to win the battle a little bit. So the virus says, oh, I'm not as efficient as I used to be. I'm going to change a couple of things, how I enter the cell, which is a spike protein. And then when they sequence it, they look at all the sequence of the spike proteins like, oh, there's 4 building blocks that change. We're going to call this one the beta. And then the next time they find, oh, here's 4 more building blocks that change on the other side of the spike protein, we'll call this gamma. And we would see those originate in India. We'd see them originate in South America because they would start somewhere else where there was no vaccination at the time. And so finally what happened, you start seeing vaccinations, start seeing more people with immune system. The Delta variant kind of did the same thing. It went to India where there was very low vaccination rates, and it changed the spike protein a little bit so it could replicate better. And that's kind of what it does. And so that's really the difference between them. It's just little changes in the proteins on the surface of how they get into the cell. Makes them a little better against our defenses, if you will. So
Ties into a question I got today, and then a chance to get on the nose. We've had the regular corona, the alpha, we've got the delta right now. The question was, what's next? Are we going to continue to have to live with some type of coronavirus year after year?
okay. So
Corona Light with a lime.
Yeah. I'll get my crystal ball out, you know, and I think the consensus is that we had a chance if, say, we had vaccinated everybody in May when the numbers were less than 10,000 cases per day, we might have had a chance to hit some kind of herd immunity and stop this thing. But that would have taken such a high number. Remember, herd immunity, when the virus isn't very transmissible, maybe 70% of the population. When it's Delta variant, it becomes 95% of the population. It changes that number. And so, you know, basically, I lost my question again. I keep rolling.
Is it going to be endemic?
I'm doing terrible.
Is it going to be? You're doing great.
Yeah,
Just hang in
thanks,
there.
man.
Hang in there. I got your back.
Is it going to be endemic? I think the guess is yes, because of the poor vaccination rate. Because of so many people getting it, you know, not enough people getting it yet, that this is probably going to be something we're going to see hang out to where 3 years from now, yep, coronavirus caused some illness. A lot of people got a cold from it, and that's about it. And some people went on to have a bad outcome. I think we're going to see that kind of persist in our world. It's kind of what, I'm no expert on that. I'm just saying the people that have studied viruses for 45, 50 years or whatever and longer look at patterns. And the pattern is that probably the way this virus is made, the way it enters the cell, they look at all of that history, kind of predict that this thing probably will stick around. Then people ask me, do we need a vaccine every year then? I don't think anybody knows that yet. You might find this prime series works for 3 years or 4 years. We also, Delta variant will not be the last variant. I hate to disappoint anybody in the room, but I think we're going to see more. We already know Gamma's out there, Mu's out there. They haven't turned out to be really infectious or deadly, but I think this thing's going to perpetuate as long as it can continue to replicate. And remember, if something replicates, that's how it mutates. That's what they do. As it replicates in a cell, it mutates. It makes mistakes. The flu is very good at that, and it doesn't correct its mistakes. So that's why we can't keep up with the vaccine for the flu. Where the coronavirus isn't quite as good at fixing it fixes its mistakes a little bit, so it's slower. So.
On a more positive note, are you excited about the future of virology? I mean, do you think that this process has really advanced? I mean, I know you mentioned SARS 20 years ago, but
Yeah.
do you think you've learned more in the last year than you probably did in the last
I know I've read more virology and immunology than any ER doctor should. So, but yeah, you know what? There's a
come from this event?
Yeah, it's really cool, and I'll tell you where it's really going to be cool is targeted therapy for illness. So in other words, we're going to make a blueprint that we send in as a piece of RNA of the blueprint on how to trick the cancer cell that's in a certain place, and we're going to be able to put that in there and have the immune system say, oh no, we're not going to let this cancer cell grow here, without giving you a medication that destroys your entire body, ruins your hair and your eyesight and has side effects and everything chemotherapy does. I think that there's some real technology sitting on this with RNA vaccines. So yeah, from a scientific, I've how many times have I told you we'll be all talking about, I'm like, this is really cool, you guys, because for me, there's some really neat stuff going on when you look at the guys that are outside of the politics and are just trying to figure out science. There's some really neat stuff going on. So, and I think we may see an RNA vaccine for the flu. They hope that they can come up with something there that could be mass produced much more easily instead of growing it in eggs. But all that's kind of on the burner. This stuff's obviously omnipresent right now. So. Yeah.
So what about therapeutics like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, where they're proven antivirals, yet they've been kind of squashed?
Right. Right. A great question, man. And I think one thing we haven't talked about, we talked about vaccines, we haven't been talking about treatment. Anything else you're talking about, you want to know what you're going to be treated with that cures it, right? And we haven't really been talking about that because viruses are notoriously hard to treat. We know that. HIV, a lot of things out there. We've figured them out to some extent, but it's really hard to figure them out overall. So, I don't know. What else? I'm losing my sugar here, I think.
So the ivermectin and
Keep segueing.
the ivermectin and those other ones, is it just
Yeah, that's
we've had a lot of questions about that. One of the questions I asked Dr. Campbell, I said, is it just because pharma can't make any money off of those? And his response to me was, which is the other cheap one that they are using?
So right now, one of the only treatment that we have that we know really works is Decadron. And Decadron is excellent. All right, that's what's keeping people alive in our hospital, getting them off of ventilators. That's a couple of dollars. It's a medication we've had around forever. So Decadron's been really good, and so that kind of goes against that. We're only using medicines that are really expensive. The ivermectin and the hydroxychloroquine, they've been used in some categories where they've been proven to work, like they've seen in other countries, and there's studies out there that said this seems to really work. But what's happened so far in the randomized controlled trials where they really put the fire to this thing and put it into test, there hasn't been enough evidence for the FDA or anybody from the government to put that forward for everybody. And so I think that's confusing to people. Is there some promise there? But the hydroxychloroquine was a good example where everybody thought it worked, and what we started seeing was people had heart arrhythmias and were dying from the hydroxychloroquine. And so they took it off the market and said there's not shown enough benefit that the risk to other people is worth it. The ivermectin's a whole other topic. That's a pretty hot topic right now. And I would say, I would have to see the randomized controlled trials where the scientists really weigh in on them and say this will work. And I really do have faith that if that were true, that it would be used. I don't think it's just big pharma stomping it down because there's no money in ivermectin, which is the going theory, right? I really don't think that. I think there's enough people like me in those roles that really do want to do good for mankind. And if they saw a drug that would treat this disease, I really think it would come through if it was studied properly. So that's not the best answer for you.
We have had some people order it in this community. We decided as an organization that we weren't going to put a stop to that. Some organizations said, no, we're not going to allow it to be ordered. So we did order that, but once the big double blind came out, I tell you the hardest thing for me is seeing our critical care and pulmonology docs who really are like, what tools do we have to fight this? It's just, for some of these individuals, it's just a slow and really poor disease process. And I think Dr. Avendano and Dr. Chavan, our two critical care docs, will say, we can't tell you why this treatment worked for Jeremy. It didn't work for Scott. It worked for this part. And that's one of the hardest part for our nurses. It's just day after day, week after week, month after month of, I mean, you guys see the reports are out there, people dying continually from this disease. And there's just a lot of burnout and a lot of, I mean, that's hard work. I can't imagine what some of our caregivers are doing because we don't know that, did this drug work for this person? Did this therapy work for this person? It's really scary, and why. Yep.
Do you guys think, with the current state of COVID and the current statistics, in your opinion, justify mandates?
Vaccination mandates? Oh my goodness, you just want to ask that one on me. Holy cow.
You are being recorded.
Yeah, I know, I'm being recorded. I think what we're seeing is about, and I just sent out an article this morning, in fact, to my team. So healthcare, we've already gotten the mandate. It's a condition of participation. And we're seeing about on average, just under 1% of employees may leave an organization. What I said to my staff is I don't take that individual choice, free will, my body. I don't take that lightly. But the article today also quoted that what about the other 99% that want a safe work environment? What about our patients that want to have a less of an opportunity to catch coronavirus when they come into the hospital, right? And so there is a responsibility, and I'm going to speak for healthcare institutions. If you were going to pin me down, I would say there is a responsibility for hospitals in particular to keep our patients and our caregivers as safe as possible. The real $1 million question for us is, what, if any, are the exemptions that are afforded to us in other areas under the ADA, so religious and medical exemptions. Dr. Campbell kind of answered the question about the medical exemptions. We just don't have them because we don't have data linking poor outcomes to the vaccine. We don't have that. And then you're down to the religious exemptions, and how we've handled that at Firelands in the past. It's kind of this formula based on certain criteria and what percent of protection of herd immunity we're trying to get. So, that's probably above my pay grade as far as full industry. I mean, again, I kind of told you I have this unique background of being a son of a Baptist pastor, fiercely independent Baptist churches, not part of a denomination or a larger congregation, but yet then being in healthcare. So I can see it on both sides. I do think there's a lot of smart people who think in order for this pandemic to end, that's what we need. And so I think that's why those decisions are being made. I don't know if you'd have a different answer on that.
Oh, you're gonna make me answer that? Yeah. So personally, I like to just see everybody understand how this affects you and what it means, and just get the dang vaccine. I do have issues with trying to tell people what to do. None of us like to be told what to do. We like to make those decisions on our own. But when it starts affecting the whole, I do have a problem with that. So, it's okay to make your own decisions if you're the only one involved. But when we start affecting other people by our decisions, children and people that can't protect themselves, immunosuppressed people, people that have disabilities, when we start doing that, then it's a lot harder for me to go into that. You just have a right to make your own decision all the time. And I think that's really where mandates come down, as they start to say what's good for the whole good of everybody. And if we look back on vaccines in the past, had we not really pushed them, I don't think we could have made as much of a dent as we have now. So I'm not going to answer that one straight up for you, because I have a little trouble with that. I got a best friend that thinks that's the craziest thing ever, that somebody would mandate him to get a vaccine. So I get it, but I also have to watch people come out with really bad diseases and have bad outcomes in the hospital. And it's hard to ask somebody that sees that, if everybody got vaccine, would we not have to see that? That's a tough one. So.
What we do know is that our federal rules trump any state legislation. So for us at the hospital, we really don't have a choice. And there is some legislation going through the state of Ohio on preventing mandates. But I'll tell you, the business community is absolutely split on that. I mean, it just shows you how hard of a decision it is. Some folks are like, take it out of my hands, just have a mandate, you know. Others are like, this is my business, I want to run it the way I should run it. And I don't envy the business community in that. But for hospitals, we're under the Medicare and Medicaid conditions of participation. And so we really don't have a choice if we want to take federal dollars, which is about 70% of our revenue.